welcome to Pure Hustle Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're here for episode 403, another themed episode.
That's right, 403. And today we're talking about the other side of the coin from last week's episode. So last week we talked about the advantages of being a part-time seller. If you're a part-time reseller, there's a lot of pros and cons that come with that. And we wanted to kind of highlight some of the positives, some of the things that maybe full-time sellers don't think about, or maybe part-time sellers forget as benefits, or people who are maybe considering moving between full-time or part-time. So we wanted to highlight some of those benefits. And today we're going to talk about the other side of the coin, which is being a full-time reseller. What are the benefits that come with that? What are the positives? And Orlando is our resident expert when it comes to full-time reselling. And I'm the part-time reseller here. So I think the way we'll do this is Orlando will share his experiences with what makes these things positive, and I'll kind of chime in with, as an outsider, as a part-time reseller, what maybe my conceptions, maybe misconceptions are of what it means to be a full-time reseller, and we can kind of riff off of that. So man, Orlando, how are you doing?
Well, I don't know if this episode is about how I'm doing, because you check out our updated episodes, but I will say this episode, I want to make sure people understand, is we're not going to talk about the downside of being a full-time reseller, right? We'll talk about that a little bit, but this is more the advantages. Like why should you jump from part-time to full-time? All right, because there is a time where that is definitely something you want to do. And as we mentioned in our last episode, there's definitely a time where you don't want to be a full-time seller. And we actually have some really old school episodes. We've done a few of these, what does it take to be a full-time reseller? What are things you need to think about? I think we did like a 2-3 part series about what you should have in order before you jump into full-time. One of the things I always warn people is you can watch all these YouTube videos and you watch these full-time resellers, and there's a couple misconceptions. One is the idea that I can just drop everything right now and become a full-time seller. And if you do that, I think that puts you at a disadvantage, because if you're new to reselling, there's a steep learning curve that if you're part-time, we talked about this last week, you have some time to kind of learn and develop your skill, get better at it. So when you're full-time, you definitely know what you're doing. The other part of it is there's a whole financial aspect you have to think about, in the sense that, yes, we're going to talk about today how you can scale. We're going to talk about the freedom. We're going to talk about all the good things, but there also has to be a healthy amount of capital for you to source. You have to have, your benefits in order, the benefits that you're going to lose that you had as a part-time seller, which gave you the advantage that now you're going to have to figure out. But there's a lot of benefits, a lot of pluses to being a full-time reseller. And I would say there isn't a number one, but one of the top ones is the fact that you can source when others can't. I think that gives you a great advantage, because when people are doing part-time, right, they're working 40-hour jobs, maybe 50-hour jobs, maybe 60-hour jobs. And so as a full-time reseller, you don't have all the time in the world, but you have plenty of time that, hey, if there's a local deal, you can drop whatever you're doing at the moment, and you can just go and make that deal, right? One of the tough things, if you're part-time, right, you might be on OfferUp at 9 a.m. and you don't have lunch until noon. And so you message them and you're like, hey, I'm really interested. Can I stop by at noon? And then you get that message that goes, well, I have somebody interested and they're going to stop by at 10 a.m. You can't do the whole, well, I can stop by at 9:30, or, can I stop by earlier? You're just stuck. Like, you're at the mercy of that schedule that you're at for your job. Where if you're full-time, you can, it could be 2 a.m. You can make that deal. When it comes to the thrift store, right? If you're sourcing at a thrift, you have the ability to get up early and be the first person in that thrift store. If you're part-time, right, usually your hours are around the time that a thrift store opens, unless you're doing a midnight shift or a late shift or something like that. And so you're at a disadvantage. When it comes to Fridays, I speak this on the West Coast. I know on the Midwest and the East Coast, like I think garage sales start on Wednesday or something. I don't know if that is it like that in Texas. Are there garage sales on Wednesday and Thursdays?
Yeah, no, I've actually noticed more of them here.
Yeah. So, here when I used to be part-time, I could only go and source garage sales on Saturdays, right? Because I was a teacher, and I worked Monday through Friday, and unless I somehow was able to get up, early and not have to show up to school by 7 a.m., I could maybe hit some garage sales on the way, but that never happened, right? But as a full time seller, you can be the first at an estate sale. You can get there on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You have the ability to go network with a ton of people during this time, right? If somebody contacts you and they say, hey, I know somebody that has a deal over here, can you make it over here? You can make it. Like, you have the time, you have the ability to schedule out your week and source when you want, where when you're part-time, you're at the mercy of your 9 to 5 when you're able to do those things. So that's one of the big things I noticed. I remember I had mentioned this earlier when I was deciding to be full-time, is when I was a teacher, I would take the summer break, the spring break, the Christmas break, and I would say, hey, for 1 week, I'm going to function like a full-time reseller. And those were the days when I used to go to the thrift heavy, and I would say, okay, on Monday I'm going to go to these 3 stores, on Tuesday I'll go to these 3 stores, Wednesday I'm going to focus on listing, and then Thursday I'll hit these 3 stores, and Friday I'll hit these 3 stores. But when I was part-time, I didn't have that ability. It was more like, hey, Wednesday nights I'm gonna hit those 2. I'll do garage till Saturday, and that's kind of it. And so it's just kind of nice. It's just less competition when you're out there. I got to tell you, especially when you go to the estate sales when they're like on a Wednesday and Thursday. Now the other side is it's all the other full-time resellers that are there too, right? But it is very nice. You don't feel like you're missing out on stuff. I remember when I was a part-time reseller, I'd go to an estate sale the second day, and there's a lot of nice things I pick up, and I would do the dumb thing of asking what was there before, and I'd find out. I'm like, if only I
Yeah.
was able to make it.
Yeah, I have a unique position in that as a teacher. There are times throughout the year, several weeks throughout the year during the summer, and then weeks throughout the year during other holidays, where I have the opportunity to potentially act like a full time reseller. So I get to kind of dip my toes in the water, and I think that's something that anybody with a 9 to 5 could potentially do. Take a Friday off every once in a while and just check to see what garage sales are like on a Friday, or that this thrift store always does their big restock on Wednesday. So take a Wednesday off and see, and do that a couple of times as a part-time reseller to see if it would help make that jump to full time or not. But I do know as a part-time reseller with a normal full-time job that there is a lot of frustration when you see full-time resellers able to go to those Thursday or Friday garage sales, able to go to the thrift stores on those days where things are restocking. Or the big one for me is those Facebook marketplace pickups. I can't tell you how many times I found the deal, like, man, this is a killer deal. So you message the person when I'm on my lunch break at work and I say, hey, I'm going to be off at 4:15. I can be to you by like 4:37 exactly. This is what my Google Maps is telling me. Can I come by then? And they're like, well, I don't know, someone's going to come look at it at 3:30, so if it's still here you can look. And it's like, no. So and there have been times where I've considered sending my wife on some of the deals, but then it's like, you never know, especially with the meetup. So it's a tough one. And you can kind of get envious of those full-time resellers. But that's definitely a benefit, Orlando. I mean, you've got other responsibilities. If you're, got other things you're doing, you can't always drop anything at any time. But there is a little bit more flexibility to say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna stop what I'm doing right now and go and pick up this item from somebody on Facebook Marketplace, and then I'll come home and finish my shipments or my listing.
Yeah, I remember that was one of the biggest. I remember my biggest hauls I would have, would be middle of the day, and it was great. It was great. I could just show up and I could take my time, and that kind of leads into the next one, the ability to spend time and learn new niches. And now I know we talked about when you're part time, you have more time in the sense that you're not in a hurry to go sourcing, right? So, if you want to be super selective on what you want to pick up, you can be super selective because you don't feel this impending crisis of you have to continue sourcing and you have to continue making money, which is, that's the other side of full-time reselling, that you always have to be sourcing and you always have to be listing. Like, because if this is your livelihood, this is how you're going to make money. Like, there is no stopping the hamster wheel. Like, it has to keep moving. But the advantage to that is I've learned a lot more about a lot of items. So, for example, trains was one of the big things I got into, old model Lionel trains and Bachman trains and so on when I went full time, because I had these major hauls. And so I could spend an entire day and just learn about these trains, or pick up a huge haul and spend the whole day and learn what's valuable and what's not. And so what would take maybe, several trips or several weeks to learn as a part-time reseller, I could get that done in one day. When I had my major Hot Wheel haul a couple of years back, maybe it's been 3 years, I don't know, it's been a while back. I had picked up like 1,000 Hot Wheel items, and I remember it just took me 4 to 5 hours in the day, to just go through the different red lines, go through the different models, learn what cards, the cards are the back of the Hot Wheels package, which ones were valuable, what punch and unpunch meant, like all these things that if I was part-time, I would have been like, I don't have the time to look into all that. I don't have the time to sort through all that. So you have a lot more time. You have all that time too to organize that inventory. And so, full time though, this and let me talk about the disadvantage with all that is the fact that you have all that ability to learn new stuff. You can also get lost, right? You can end up spending a lot of time that you shouldn't be spending. But it's really nice because it gives you the advantage of learning a lot. Like I remember when I first started doing the podcast, I was primarily an Amazon seller. I think I was like 80% Amazon, 20% eBay. And I could spend the time, I could go into a Walmart and I could spend 3 or 4 hours scanning all kinds of stuff in the store, right? I could go, that was back in the day when Toys R Us existed. I could go to Toys R Us and I could scan all day and I would find so many good items, right? And that was before there were those programs that now, if they have an online presence, it'll kind of sort everything out for you and give you what inventory is available and the ROI and so on. But I could spend that time and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what I could source really quickly. Where, if you're part time, you can't get to the Ross store and scan everything in the Ross store. You can't get to the TJ Maxx or the Marshall and scan everything for Amazon. And so being full time definitely gives the opportunity. I also want to say that, when I was doing Amazon, it was nice because I could hit maybe 20 stores in a day, and I could have a shipment out, about 5 or 6 shipments out to Amazon. Or if I was part-time, I could maybe hit one store. And so to me, it allowed me to learn a lot. Allowed me to learn, where to source, what categories not to source. It allowed me to learn a lot of vintage. I learned a lot about, vintage shirts. I learned about vintage Harley. I learned about vintage, Hot Wheels. I already mentioned vintage Disney items, Carhartt, like all these different things. Like my knowledge exponentially grew once I was a full-time reseller. Now you can do that as a part-time reseller. It's just going to take a little bit more time. One of the best ways to do that is to go to the thrift. I know we're big on garage sales, but the thing with garage sales is you only have so much exposure to so many items when you're out at garage sales. Where you're at the thrift, you have an entire store that you can start, looking up items and seeing what they're worth. So as a full-time reseller, I was able to do a lot of that. I remember going to a thrift and going, all right, if I'm going to be full-time, I need to be able to say that every time I go into a thrift store, I can at least pick up 20 items. And so I would spend, 6 hours at a thrift store, no joke. And I would go through, I remember when I was doing clothing, I'd go through all the clothing and I would pick up real quick what brands were good. And I also would pick up, what styles people liked. And then I'd go to the collectibles and I would know the difference between, what's a Funko that I want to pick up and what's a Funko that I don't want to pick up, and how many of them were trash and what was good and what was not. So you have a lot of opportunities to learn plenty when you're a full-time reseller. Or when you're part-time, you kind of have to just be really good at a couple, maybe 3 or 4, and then as things come across your way, then you maybe have the ability to look them up. But as a full-time reseller, you have plenty of time to do that.
Yeah.
And so
There's very clear direct correlation between time spent doing something and your expertise in that field, right? So the more time you can spend at a thrift store or touching good quality items, the faster you're going to be able to identify those good quality items. The more often you see a certain niche. So I definitely think there's a benefit to that. Now, one of the things that can be maybe like an encouragement to, part-time sellers on that sense. Cause I know what it's like to feel like, man, if I could just spend a little bit more time researching this stuff. I've got my normal 9 to 5. So on my lunch break, I'm trying to like look up this new niche and research. And so you're spending extra time to try and develop, but to realize that it's there, even though there's that correlation between time and then your expertise in the field, that part of that needs to just be good quality time. So it is very possible for full-time resellers to be spending a lot of time wasting that time, and for part-time resellers to be using some of that time really wisely, that they have, even if they only have an hour a week where they can be doing research or being outsourcing. If they're using that hour well, it may be better than like 5 or 6 hours from a full-timer. Not necessarily, but it is possible.
I hear what you're saying.
So but that being said, you're right. Like the more time you could spend doing things, the better. Now, where I do think that the benefit we talked about last time with the part-time seller is, like, for instance, garage sales. Because you're limited on the amount of time you can source on a Saturday, you're trying to move through them quickly, right? And so that's, you don't get the opportunity as a full-time reseller when you're sourcing, when you're under time constraint, to be doing research, where a part-time seller might, because they don't have as much pressure to make a certain amount of money. So it goes both ways, right? There's, when you're in the low times, when it's the middle of the week and it's at a thrift store or just time spent on Facebook Marketplace, sure, you have more time to learn new things. You can focus a little bit more. And I think that is a benefit. And if you are a full-time reseller, don't neglect that, right? Like, don't neglect the opportunity that you have. Because I think a lot of times full-time resellers will think of just the free time they have. Man, I'm doing good enough. Look, I only had to work 23 hours this week. I'm killing it. Yeah. Well, work the 40 hours or work the 60 hours anyways, and use that time to learn, because, man, that is a blessing that you have as a full-time reseller.
Yeah, and I appreciate you talking about the ability to waste away time, because one of the things that being a full-time reseller forces you to do is to be consistent with your time. I've talked about this many times. In the early days of being a full-time reseller, 2018, 2019, for me, like, things were great in reselling. So I could get away with wasted a lot of time. I mean, I was able to put in part-time hours and make a really nice full-time income. But now, as things have become more difficult, it's forced me to say, all right, I need to schedule out my time. I need to make sure I'm doing, listing in the morning for 2 hours, and then after I do my listing, then I can go outsourcing. I need to make sure that, from 3:30 to 4:30, that no matter what, that time is blocked off, because I have to make sure I pack items to get to the post office before 5 o'clock. So it kind of forces you to be really efficient. I know that sounds weird, that, as a part-timer, you would think it would force you more to be efficient. I found that when I was part-time, I didn't feel the need to always make that income. And so I wasn't like, oh, I need to make sure I do this amount of listings every day. I need to make sure I have this time blocked off. It was kind of like, it's a secondary income. It's, I'll get to it when I get to it. When I was a full-time reseller, it's like, okay, if I don't list today, I'm going to be in trouble. If I don't source today, I'm going to be in trouble. If I don't make sure I get back to these messages, I'm going to be in trouble. And so being a full-time reseller forced me to have the discipline that I didn't really care to have when I was part-time. That has changed over time. You hear in the early episodes, first 100 of Pure as a Podcast, how I always talk about how I hate the word discipline, because I would say that came out of a place of things were really easy. And now, like, you don't have an option as a full-time reseller in this economy. Like, you have to be consistently doing all the things, the best practices that make you successful. You have to schedule out your time. And so I think it brings a kind of professionalism. You switch from it being a hobby to being a business. I've mentioned many times I love reselling because I'm able to feel like I'm still doing a hobby, but it's actually a business. But it does force you to get bookkeeping taken care of, right? That's one of the big things. And we'll talk about My Reseller Genie right now, so we're talking about that. So if you haven't yet signed up for My Reseller Genie is bookkeeping software for resellers, made by resellers, and it's really effective. You're able to import everything from eBay and from Poshmark, and what you're able to do is, all those shipping fees, all those ad fees, It takes care of all of that. It consolidates all of that into a nice format that you can give to your tax person, and you don't have to stress about your taxes. But even if you're not doing taxes, it allows you to keep tabs on your profit and losses, what you're sourcing, what's good, what's not good, and so on. And so if you haven't had an opportunity to use my reseller genie, go to the link below and use our code Pure Hustle, and you'll get 15% off the first month. Again, use the link below and use our code Pure Hustle, and you get 15% off the first month of my reseller genie. So going back to the bookkeeping, when I became a full-time reseller, I had to do the bookkeeping. Like, there was no options, because taxes will kill you if you're a full-time reseller and you're not keeping tabs on what you're spending, your mileage, you're not keeping tabs on, your office expenditures, all these different things. When you're part-time, you're like, oh, the W-2 will, everything will it's pretty easy, right? I'll just jump on TurboTax. I'll just do my taxes. But when you're a full-time reseller, it makes you basically have to be a professional. Like, you, unless you want to give away your money to the government, you have to be able to keep tabs on what you're spending, how much you're allotting of even your property to resell, like all these different things. Because we had mentioned the part-time episode that when you do taxes as a full-time reseller, you actually end up having to owe more taxes initially in the beginning, because you have to pay double social, you have self-employment tax. But on the other end, the advantage to it is you have a lot of deductions that you can take out as a full-time reseller, because let's say you're traveling out of state, right? Let's say you pick up a rental car, let's say you get a hotel, let's say you get some meals, like all those things are deductible, right? And so you have to make sure that you deduct every single dollar. And I find, as a full-time reseller, it's allowed me to kind of been able to find a good balance. For example, like my homeschooling that I do, I have, the only deductions I have is if I buy school supplies, right? But that's it, right? Everything else is pretty much going to end up being taxable, right? But with reselling, right, inventory that doesn't sell, right, I can claim as a loss. Even from the shipping supplies, all these different things, because you're buying on mass scale, and so it allows you to do that. And so you have to be consistent as a full-time reseller, and I think that's one of the benefits. And if I ever go back to part-time, I think I'll be a far better part-time reseller, because everything that allows you to be efficient as a full-time reseller, I only have to do on a smaller scale, and I'll be able to do really well doing that. So I don't know. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, you do have to. I mean, I've said a lot of times in this podcast that you've got to treat your business like a business. Now, if it's a hobby, and you're still going to have to pay taxes, you're going to have some business aspects of it. But for most of our listeners, this is more than just, hey, I want to make an extra $100 every couple of months in order to, pay for my, hobby of whatever it is, tinkering on electronics. And it tends to be like, I want to pay bills with this. Like, I want to get out of debt. I want to make, so oftentimes especially part-time resellers, they don't treat their reselling as a business, especially because as it scales, they didn't have the foundations in place. But I've noticed it even in the full-time community. Like, if there's not a consistency of, I've got to get my taxes done, I actually got to pay attention to numbers. This is more than just, I'm gonna just throw noodles on the wall and see what sticks. It's more of like, hey, I need to make sure that the inventory I'm picking up is actually moving. And what you've talked in the past, like sell-through rate used to not matter. Well, it always mattered, but because so many things sold, and maybe you weren't as dependent on the reselling money, it didn't matter as much. But every business, like things like sell-through rate, like are these items moving? Can they move at a rate quick enough where I can get them in and out? Am I losing money storing them? Am I losing money on, and really starting to get granular and consistent with those things is very important, because the more you treat your business like a business, the more potential you have to flourish and succeed. Because the nice thing as a full-time reseller, with you being your own boss and you get full responsibility, but you also get full benefit. Like a lot of businesses, you look at who gets put into middle management positions, and it's like, man, these people are ruining stuff. Well, you are your own boss and your own worker, so you have to be consistent and think of like, okay, the things I'm doing, I'm doing for the boss, and the boss happens to be me in this instance. So you have to be consistent and treat your business like a business, and you'll get that kind of benefit out of it.
No, agreed. Now, moving into that, let's talk about selling. So as a full-time reseller, you have the opportunity to sell a lot more, right? Make a lot more money. And so you're able to spend that time listing. I remember one of the biggest obstacles when I was a part-time reseller was it was a full day of teaching for me, and after I'd probably go to a sporting event, or there was times I was coaching, and I get home and I spend time with the family. And the only time I had to list was after everybody was in bed, right? And so we're talking about like 10 o'clock to midnight. I'm cleaning up items. I'm making sure everything works and everything, and then I start listing. So I can only list so much, right? But as a full-time reseller, like I can devote as much time as I need to, right? And you kind of like, as I mentioned before, you have to, right? It's not an option, right? But it is nice where as a part-time reseller, I can maybe list at the most 5 to 10 items a day. That as a full-time reseller, I could, the sky's the limit, but I could list, for me, 30 to 50 at a time, right? And that's if I'm being consistent. I would say right now I'm not doing that, because a lot of family things, and we'll talk about, that's the other benefit, is I don't have to do that. Right now business isn't going so well, so I probably need to do more of that. But you have the time, right? You're not limited. You're not pulled away from your 9 to 5. If you need a block out time during the week to list, you can list. And so I saw that as an advantage. I remember when I was part time, I was like, oh, if I could only get to having 300 listings, if I could only get to having 500, if I only can get to having 1,000 listings. And it took a long time for me to get there. I remember I didn't get to 1,000 listings until maybe being part time for maybe 3 or 4 years. And I remember when I finally went full time, I only had 1,200 listings on eBay. Now I was doing a lot of Amazon, but I only had 1,200. Now I have close to 3,000. I've actually had close to 4,000, and the reason being is because I've had the time to go out, not go out there, but to go to my MacBook, set up a time to list, and be able to consistently list on the daily. And so I see that as an advantage. The other thing is scaling. It was really tough to scale as part time. I know there's some people that are really successful. I applaud them. I think if you're able to, put in 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week at a regular job, and then you're able to scale your business, more power to you. But I remember that it was so refreshing when I became a full-time reseller, going, okay, if I want to, throw together 1 to 200 listings this week, 300 listings, I can do that. If I want to go and make a major bulk buy, like I have the time to do that. I remember as a part-time reseller, there were opportunities for me to buy a storage unit. There were opportunities for me to go and make a huge bulk buy purchase. But I remember one of the things that held me back was going, I don't know if I have the time to sort through all this. I don't know if I have the time to actually, determine what's good and what's not. Do I have time to, donate some of these items? Do I have time to sift out if some of these are local deals and some of these are things I should list on eBay or another platform? But when I became a full-time reseller, it was nice because then I could scale. Then I could go out because, time wasn't a constraint, and I could maybe scope out 5 huge hauls and then determine which was the better one. And then I could spend the time, because when you make a major purchase, it takes time, right? I've had stuff where I've had to, rent out a vehicle to get everything that I put together, and then to bring it into the house, and then to sort through all of it, and then to list through all of it. Now, you can maybe make the argument as part-time, you could do that. And maybe that sets you up for life, not for life, but at least for the next month. But as a full-time, I feel like you can process a lot of that a lot faster, right? Something that maybe as a part-timer would take you a month, as a full-time reseller, you can maybe in 3 to 5 days go through that whole process and move on to the next haul. So you're able to scale a lot faster because you're able to devote that time, which allows you to build your business. Mike and I have been doing this podcast since 2018, and I've been able to scale since that time, right? Even the place I'm living at now is, I don't know, 5 times bigger than where I was living before. The amount of items I have is far more. The space I have devoted to reselling, the space I have devoted to the podcast is far more than I had before when I was in that condo. And I truly believe the reason I was able to do all that was moving to full time. It allowed me to scale, and it allowed me to have that time to do that. So
Yeah, I mean, going back to that idea even of consistency and workflow, it kind of goes here with the idea of scaling is we've talked in the past about like strategies for listing items. If you can, it's beneficial to list 30 shoes at once and then 30 shirts and then 30 pieces of, whatever trinket. If you can stay consistent and not be jumping around from different item types where you're setting up different, you know, photo booths or you're setting up different like listing procedures, if you can just like all 30 of these items or all 10 of these items are very similar, it's going to make the workflow faster. Well, as a
mhm,
part-time seller, trying to scale and trying to sell items, it's more challenging to do that, right? It's more challenging to set up that kind of a system because maybe you go out and you source and you only pick up one pair of shoes and you only pick up one shirt and you only pick up one random electronic for the week. Well, you're not going to wait until you've got a whole bunch of them listed. So then your workflow, when you do list, so let's say you sit down and you say, okay, I got an hour to list this little death pile that I have, that you're going to get fewer items listed in that time frame. You're not going to be able to list as many items in that same hour that a full-time reseller can, because a full-time reseller going through their death pile can say, all right, here's my tote of shoes that I need to list. Here's my tote.
yeah.
And so the workflow is going to be faster. So in that same hour time frame, all other variables taken out, like not even figuring like just how much more, fluent you are with the eBay platform and all of that, but just the ability to move through items quickly is going to be much more efficient for a full-time seller who has, items that they're selling that are similar items. Whereas it might be more challenging for a part-time reseller. They would potentially have to say, I'm not going to list anything for months until I have these death piles built up to a place to make it efficient. Well, then that's not an efficient way of doing it either. So they have to end up being less efficient while they're listing their items. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those benefits of being a full-time seller is you can scale and your efficiency can be uh, more tuned because of the ability to have a more consistent workflow. Whether it's even shipping, right? Like if you're shipping certain items, if for instance, if I sell an item
Yeah.
today, I might sell one item today, which means now I've got to get everything set up, find this item, get my packing stuff. But if you're a full-time seller and you're going to be selling pretty much guaranteed 10 to 20 items today, and I always pack my items between 11 and 12, and I'm going to be able to get them all done at that time. So you're going to be able to move through packing 20 items in a much more efficient manner than I can potentially pack one.
Well,
It's still going to
it
take you
even
more time, but per item, it's going to be less for you.
well, it even affects your sourcing again in the sense that it's something that might take me 3 hours to ship. Right, I'm willing to source that item if it's really profitable because of the full time reseller. I have that time, right? Because if you're part time and you look at an item, I think about I had a coin dispenser for buses that I had purchased one time, and it was $40, and I sold it for like 400 to 500, and it took me like 2 hours to pack that thing. And if I was part time, the time crunch would be crazy, right? having to pack those items. So that's something to think about. But yeah, I want to add something here too, though. You have to think about too your stage in life too. If I was, in my early 20s, not married, no kids, and I was a full time reseller, oh, the time I would have, right? Especially if this is it. Like you're a single guy and you're trying to do reselling. You could be reselling, you know, maybe you should sleep a little bit more, but you could be reselling 18 hours a day. Like you could kill it. You could be killing it. I say this all the time. Like if I knew what I knew now in a younger Orlando at the age of 22, 23, like I'd be doing far better, far better, far better. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I have kids and stuff, and I don't I love, I'd rather spend more time with my kids than, be single with no kids and reselling. But if you're young and you're listening to this and you want to jump to full time, or not even young, if it's just you and you have a lot of time, like this is perfect because this gives you the ability to just scale really quick, because you don't have not only, if you have a family, you not only do you have your 9 to 5 pulling you also have your family pulling you, right? And your family is more important, and so you want to make sure that you block out that time for your family. And so maybe part-time is a better way to go. But if you're a full-time reseller and you don't have, people that are depending on you, you can actually even take more risks. That's the one thing I realized when I became a full-time reseller. I took some major risks in the beginning. I remember at Toys R Us, I'd probably drop like 20 to 30K when the store was closing. Closing.
Clothing.
It wasn't getting dressed. It
No
was
wonder Toys
closing.
R Us didn't make it. It's a toy store. It's a clothing store. They're called Toys R Us. Man.
But I think about that now, and would I make that kind of purchase now? And it all depends. I have to have a lot more to think about because I have kids, that are going to school, and there's certain expenses. But if it's just me, like, and things don't work out, I can always make that money up faster because I'm a full-time reseller. So those are things to think about. Hey, before we move forward, what's awesome is in our Discord, we have all kinds of resellers. We have people that, it's just them and they're full-time and they're killing it. They're spending 12 to 14 hours a day. They're sourcing all day long. They're finding stuff all day long. And then we have others that are part-time, and, they're able to just kind of take their time sourcing, and they find really quality stuff and they're sharing. And so we have all kinds of resellers in our Discord. And if you ever want to join our Discord, the only way is by supporting us on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/podcast, or you go to the link below, and you sign up for $5.55 a month, just $5.55 a month, you'll make that money back. I promise you. I don't know if I want to make a promise. Is that a legal thing? Anyways, I'm pretty sure you can make that money back pretty quick. $5.55. All you need is one bolo that you end up picking up and you end up selling, and you should be golden. Or one tip, you save money on shipping, whatever it is. There's so much to learn in our Discord. So if you haven't had a chance yet, make sure to sign up. It helps us out, helps us create more content, helps us, during those times when we're not able to get as much ad revenue or sponsors, to continue pumping out this free content. So again, sign up below in the link, patreon.com/podcast for $5.55 a month. Also, if you want to learn more or interact with us more, you can find us on social media. We are Pure Hustle Podcast on all socials. On Exo, we are Pure Hustle Cast. As always, you can give us a call at 619-738-1170. That's 619-738-1170. Or shoot us an email at purehustlepodcast@gmail.com. As always, grateful for everyone that listens to our podcast. If you haven't had a chance yet, come on over, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you're notified when we go live or any other episodes drop, and make sure to hit that like button. And, we just crossed the 9K threshold, which I'm happy about as a podcast. That's we're getting there, right? Because all our episodes are pretty much podcasts. So if everybody just did this one time that listens to our podcast, we'd be over 10K. My goal is to be at over 10K by the end of summer. I know it's kind of lofty, but that would be beautiful. And as always, grateful for all the iTunes reviews. If you haven't had a chance yet, jump on over to iTunes. Let people know why you love the podcast. Drop us that 5-star rating. It helps us a ton in the algorithm. All right, let's talk about some wins here. Some Pure Hustle Podcast wins from the community.
Come on, hustlers. It's the freaking hustle of the week. All right, hustle of the week. Our first one, I'm going to make this a little bigger here. Our first one comes from Katie's Thrift Philly on Instagram. So my new single best sale. Most of these Department 56 usually sell between $20 to $50, but there are rare ones out there. This was from a Department 56 New England Salem Village collection, the Essex Street House. I wasn't even going to stop last Sunday at the thrift, but I'm glad I did. I paid $7.99 and sold a Department 56 New England Village Salem Willows Essex house for $479.99 plus shipping. Holy smokes, that is, man, $7.99. I mean, I've sold my fair share of Department 56, but nothing over,
No, neither have I.
20, nothing like that. That's $479. That is amazing. I'm gonna have to look that up. These the nice thing about these hustles of the week is they also kind of become bolos too.
Yeah, we're all every episode's a bolo episode. And I remember thinking about this. Yeah, you're right. Like Department 56, I would say most of it is $20 to $50. Like it's rare. Like I have sold like Elvis Graceland for like 125, and I sold like ballpark ones that were like 200. I think my highest one may have been like 275. But 479, like that had to be a rare one. So yeah, that is definitely a bolo. Nice work, Katie's Philly. I believe that's like your second or third hustle of the week on the podcast over the 400 and something episodes we've had. So nice work there. And it's always a great feeling when you're like, you know what, maybe I should stop into the thrift, and then you end up with a major score, and you go, I should always be stopping at the thrift, you know?
Yeah.
So that's great. All right, we have a second week in a row hustle of the week from Block Party. And I just, the reason I did this is because I want to emphasize that, you know, when Block Party was first listening to our podcast, I believe he was an everything reseller, and then he really became like an audiophile. Like, is that what it's called? The people
Yeah.
that like audio stuff.
Yep.
I mean, he knows his stuff, and he's just, you know, he loves it, right? You know, if you catch him on Instagram, it's a BLCK underscore party. If you follow him on Instagram, he ends up you know, going and finding vintage stuff and restoring it, and he, you know, he sets it up throughout his house, and, you know, messes with speakers. And again, that's the advantage of spending that time and learning something. So he picked up 2 vintage Macintosh amps for free from a clean out. I think last week was free too. They were headed excuse me, they were headed for the trash. Okay, again, well, where are these finds? Like, I've had some killer finds that were going to the trash, but it seems like this is a consistent pattern with him. He restored one of them and got it back to work, and so sold both of them for a total of $2,600 plus shipping. That's just wild to me.
Yeah.
That's just, you know,
free 99.
I mean, I think wasn't last week like 1,300 or something, or 3,000 or something.
Yeah.
So
no, that's crazy. I mean, that's the nice thing too with these hustles of the week, because I always can kind of count on, if you're being consistent, you're not going to get this every single day, right? You're not going
Yeah.
to get this every single month, but you can pretty much count on at least once a year, you're going to come across 1 or 2 of these. Maybe you have a year where you don't, but even as a part-time reseller, is you just got to remember that it's the hustles of the week just come from consistency, because opportunities show up, you know, they just do. And so, yeah, I mean, this just goes to show that if you're willing to learn a niche, you're willing to learn potentially how to restore some things, or just know what's not trash when other people think it is, there's money to be made. What a great sell. All right, our next one is an email, comes from Alex. It says, hello, Alex here. I recently had an amazing flip from Goodwill. It was a new rack of clothing that came out, and while checking it out, I found a couple of pieces of no bull athletic clothing, new with tags. I was excited, but it was only a few pieces, so it didn't stand out much. I then went to the women's athletic clothes racks and found another bunch of no bull shorts, also new with tags. While I'm looking at these, I'm about up to 10 pieces at this point. Another shopper came up to me and said he saw me grabbing the no bull, and he handed me some that he found. He said he knew that they were worth money, but he was not a reseller, so he just gave them to me. Then he proceeded to look at the women's clothing with me and handed me each piece that he found. In total, I left with 42 pieces of no bull clothing. So leggings, shorts, tank tops. Half was new with tags. I paid $5 a piece, so it was around $230 after tax. I got it all listed the same night, some individually and some in lots of like items. I sold a few pieces over the following days, but about a week in, I had one buyer send me an offer on every no bull listing I had left. It ended up being an order over $600. So in total, I grossed $800, clearing over $400 after fees and cost of goods. I primarily sell clothes, but I've never found this much of one brand all in one place. Thanks for allowing me the chance to share it with you guys and the podcast. Keep hustling. Man, that's great. I mean, I love seeing too that, uh, you know, these types of things do happen at thrift stores where, for whatever reason, the thrift store gets a whole bunch of, you know, dead stock, or somebody has donated a whole bunch. So if you find 1 or 2 pieces of something that's like new, or that you can tell were part of a set, don't be afraid to look around, because sometimes the items get broken up throughout the store. But a lot of times it could be, you know, various things, whether it's electronics or whether it's certain book type or certain clothing like this. For whatever reason, if you find a handful that seem like they went together at some point, there could be more in places you might not expect. So look around, because yeah, I mean, when you can pick up this many, it makes listing so much easier. What a great hustle.
Yeah, no, again, it inspires me. Like I emailed them and I said, Alex, thank you for sharing this, because we're always down on the thrift, right? We're always like, there's nothing there, it's too expensive. But you have these stories that happen. You know, I two of my biggest clothing hauls happen at the thrift. I've had bigger clothing hauls outside of the thrift, but the two biggest ones I had was one was somebody, I don't know what happened, but all their Sitka hunting gear, all their Sitka hunting gear was on a rack. And if you don't know about Sitka, it's good, it's quality, it's money. So I remember dropping like 100, and I sold everything for about $1,000. The other one is I picked up 22 Dixon flannels, and they had them at 20 bucks a piece, but I sold them for close to 60 to 100 each of them. A couple of them I sold for 200 to 300. And you just never know. Like, it just, somebody's angry at somebody and they move out or something. I don't know what it is, but you end up having these huge donations. All right, I want to share mine first because mine happened live while we were here doing the podcast. And so I had one here, but I want to share this one instead. And so I went to a garage sale, and at this garage sale, it was kind of random. There was like these little like tents, like, and I mean like miniature tents, right? Like, um, not ones that you can, like, you know, sleep in and take camping. Like, so these were kind of like for commercials, or, and this person, I think they did like photo shoots with animals or something. And so they had these miniature tents. So one was a miniature Coleman tent. The one that I sold today was a Field and Stream one. Now, here's the thing: I only paid about, I think, like, I want to say maybe $1.50 for these tents, and they're these tiny tents. And the only reason I picked them up is when I looked at comps, people were buying these for like 100 something. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, who? What? These are like, these are selling for the same price as a normal tent. Well, sure enough, you know, I sold one for $150, and then another one just sold for $125 plus shipping. And yeah, I'm just blown away by this, because these are just mini tents. Like, I'm serious. Like, they are maybe the size of, like, if you put all the books and everything together, like, would be a tent right here. So, anyways, look for like miniature things. Like, I don't think people realize that, you know, people want these items. Sometimes they're kind of you know, when people are trying to sell something, like the vintage ones are ones that, like, there used to be door-to-door salesmen, and they would have miniature models of an item. Like, people like those. Or sometimes there's store advertising ones. Those are good too. And sometimes they're created for photo shoots or something. So keep an eye. I know this isn't, I wouldn't say a bolo, but it's a hustle of the week for me, because I spent $2 or $3 and I made over $300 on these miniature tents.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
That's pretty awesome. All right, mine is actually not a profitable one for me. It's kind of a lame one in that sense, but it is one that I got to save some money. So again, kind of looking at this from the perspective of a part-time seller, don't get me wrong, I've had my fair share of huge buys recently that I know are going to make profit. But here's an interesting one. So the other day I was noticing that I could not find my USB DVD drive. Now, most computers nowadays don't have the DVD drives built into them, so you got to buy external ones. And I picked up an external DVD drive from a garage sale a couple years ago, and I've used it a ton. Things for the podcast, things for, you know, my school, and or even personal. And for whatever reason during the move, I don't think it made it. I think it got lost in a box somewhere. It got maybe tossed out. I don't know, but I don't have it. I can't find it. And I was thinking, man, that was a bummer, because I picked it up at a garage sale. I'm going to have to buy a new one now, which you can get them for like $30 that are the nice ones that have extra ports and stuff attached to them. And when I was at the Crazy Hot Deals the other day, during the $1 day, I found a brand new one sealed with all the extra ports, like one that sells for like $34 normally. I picked it up for $1, right? So it was just, what made it a hustle again is I can't tell you how many times, like, I've thought to myself, like, man, I really need X. And then I get to a garage sale or a thrift store, and there's that thing I'm looking for. Because a lot of times you see stuff, and then later on you're like, oh man, I'll probably never see that again. And a lot of times you don't. But it's almost like, you know, when you're looking for certain things, it's really cool when they show up, especially when it's something you're looking for yourself and you can save money. I saved some money doing that, and it was just kind of neat, again, showing that that is a potentially good place for me to source when they have stuff that I can sell and stuff that I could potentially use personally. So yeah, it's my mini little hustle of the week.
No, I take that as hustle of the week. So hey, thank you everyone for sharing. By the way, if you want to know how to best share, I always say email is a good way because we don't get as many emails. DMs, sometimes they get lost in the DMs. A call, I think I got to fix our Google phone, but you can always give us a call at 619-738-1170. And we always like sharing these wins because it keeps us motivated. It keeps me motivated because sometimes I'm like, man, I keep selling, $20 to $30 items, but there's always those home runs, and those home runs remind you of the potential that you can have. And that's one of the benefits of being a full-time reseller is you have the ability to pick up a lot more home runs, right? Because you're spending a lot more time out there sourcing. You have a lot more advantages. But before we move on, one of the companies that we really like working with is American Bubble Boy. American Bubble Boy has always consistently provided great quality bubble wrap, and also my go-to tape, which if you use our code Pure Hustle, you get 5% off. And so you're like, 5% off, that's not a lot, but it's already a great price at $35 for 12 rolls. So if you haven't yet, check out American Bubble Boy. I always like, now I end up picking up, I think, 1,050 square feet every time I buy, and there's no better price out there. So as far as the quality goes, as far as it's free shipping, free next day, 2 day shipping. So if you haven't checked out American Bubble Boy, use our link below, and it definitely helps us out and it helps you out. All right, now let's talk about the obvious benefits here. Okay, because I kind of left this towards the end because they're the obvious ones, but I want to emphasize this. Like, it is so nice to be your own boss. It's so nice not have to answer to anybody. It's so nice not to have to wonder what your boss is thinking. Now, the other side, you've mentioned this before, is that, well, it's all on you too, right? So that's the downside. Like, if things don't go well, guess whose fault it is? It's yours, right? You can blame all these different avenues, but in reality, if you're a full-time reseller, it's on you. So that makes it imperative that you have to make sure you have everything in order. But I love it. I love the time freedom. I gotta tell you, these last 6 years, I have zero regrets about stepping away from education. Did I miss it? Yes, I still miss it, and I may be going back in time to full-time education. But it allowed me to spend so much time with my boys. I went on so many trips. I'll never forget, there'd be times when I've been busy, and my son would go, hey, are you coming to catch my wrestling meet today? And if I was, in a 9 to 5, I'd be like, oh, I can't. I have to go to work. It's like, no, I can drop whatever I'm doing and I can go watch your wrestling meet, right? If there's, a trip that I need to make, right? If not that I need to make, but if there's a trip I want to go to, right, and I'm able to financially do it, I can just do it. I don't have to plan out my schedule. I don't have to see how much paid time off I have. Like, none of that is available. And I traveled far more as a full-time reseller than I did as a part-time reseller. I remember my first 2 years. Part of it was sourcing, but I remember during the golden era of reselling in 2020, going to Colorado, going to Wisconsin, going to Illinois, going to Minnesota, going to Indiana, like going to all these states and just traveling. Number one, because I was sourcing. And so my sourcing would pay for the trip, but I didn't, I had no time constraints, and the time freedom, it's just amazing.
Yeah, no, being your own boss is a good thing. In a lot of ways, you are your own boss in a lot of areas of life, whether or not you're a full-time reseller. But one thing that I think is, I heard one time on, I want to say it was probably a Jocko Willing podcast, but I thought it was really good, was, in a situation like that where you're your own boss, you're the general and the soldier, right? So you have to give orders to yourself, but then you also have to carry out those orders, right? And you're almost like two separate people in that sense, because a lot of times in companies or whatever, like the boss position can kind of just tell the subordinates, these are the things you need to do, and then the subordinates either do or don't do it, and depending on how much work ethic they have and the amount of work they put in, the outcome is going to be different. But a lot of times they don't have the buy-in, but there's always somebody else to blame, right? Like you can blame, well, my boss is making me do dumb things that aren't efficient, or if you're the boss, like, my employees aren't working the way they should. But in a situation where you're full time and you're responsible, like the majority of your income is coming from reselling, you have that benefit of being the one in charge, but it comes with extra responsibility. It comes with being in that position of, hey, you got to know how to issue the right commands. Here are the sequence of things we need to do today. Here are the things that need to get done. Here's the priorities for us. Here's how we're going to make money. Am I actually spending the time to look to see how we need to make money? Are we making enough money? What area? So as the boss, you need to take on all of that responsibility, but then you got to almost then delegate to yourself, okay, now I need the worker to go out and do this work. And so you're filling in both positions there. So yeah, you're right. You have nobody to blame but yourself when things go wrong. But then you also have that freedom of when you succeed, it's on you. You know, you did the work, you put in the effort. You have nobody else gets the credit but you. And so you get both benefits on that. So I think that is one way of looking at it that can be helpful.
Yeah, and the one I want to end on here is the ability to enter other ventures. And the reason I say this is when I was a part-time reseller, I had tunnel vision. It was pretty much like I'm going to use the 9 to 5 to build myself, to build my, my financial health, to, to get better, to make more money. And it was always like in that job, right? It was like, when I was a teacher, it was like, oh, I'll do Saturday school on Saturdays, or I'll substitute more. It was always in that. But when I became a reseller, you become an entrepreneur, right? So you start thinking about a lot of other things. Now, Mike's ahead of the curve on this because Mike's always been like that since I've known him. But, I never thought about, I know it sounds crazy, but I never even thought about investing. I never thought about having another side business. I never thought about the idea of, maybe I could teach part-time and I could still do full-time reselling. Like, I never thought of that. I just thought, hey, this is my job. This is all I'm going to do. Now, our culture has changed a lot. And when we started our podcast, right, we called it Pure Podcast. And one of the things was the reason we use that name. We like the ability that if we ended up doing something besides reselling, we don't have to change it. Right? We weren't, we weren't pure thrifting podcast, right? We weren't, the resellers podcast. No, there actually is one called that. But anyways, we didn't hold ourselves to just reselling, right? It was Pure Podcast because Mike and I said, hey, if we end up doing something different, right? If we end up, I don't know, inventing something, or we end up investing in another business and we're financially, set, maybe we could turn the podcast to that and we don't have to change the title. And that's one of the things that came out of being a full-time reseller was that you have an entrepreneurial mindset. You're always looking at, a different business, different ways that you can make money doing different things. And sometimes they're short-lived. Sometimes they're 6 months. Sometimes they're a year. Sometimes there's something that you're going to do for several years. Mike himself has done a lot of different things besides reselling over this time. And I think part-time, it's like 9 to 5 and it's reselling, 9 to 5 and it's reselling. But when you're full-time, it's, hey, I'm doing reselling this whole time. But you know what? I was able to notice somebody that does, I don't know, vending machines. And I go, maybe I could do that a little bit. I mean, I could dabble in that, right? Or, car washes or whatever it is. Like there's always other opportunities. And I think being a full-time reseller expands your mind to think of other ways that you can make money that is outside of the box than the normal. I mean, even us with the podcast, right? If I did not go full-time reselling, I don't think we would have the podcast, right? Because this only came out of me going to Mike and going, hey, Mike, I think I'm a step away. I'm going to go to full-time reselling. And then Mike's like, hey, maybe we should do like a YouTube video, or we should do something, because I'm starting to resell. And then I was able to devote all this time to the podcast. If you look at our social media, the first 2 or 3 years, I was posting like crazy. I mean, I think it was like 3 on the feed on Instagram, 20 Instagram stories. We would like, there was not a night that there wasn't an Instagram story for me to share. We were doing 2 or 3 episodes a week, and that was because of the time freedom from full-time reselling, but it was also of the entrepreneurial mindset that, hey, we should probably use social media to bring in more people to listen to the podcast so we can help more people that are out there. So full-time reselling, definitely a lot of advantages. And so hopefully over the last 2 weeks, you've been listening. If you've been a full-time reseller for a long time, maybe it's had you contemplate, okay, this is why I'm a full-time reseller. Or maybe it's got you to go, maybe I need to go back into part-time for a little bit. Or if you're a part-time reseller, you are more grateful. You're like, you have gratitude about why you're a part-time reseller. Or you thought, you know what, I think I'm ready to go full time, and I like all the things I'm hearing, and I want to go full time. So hopefully this helped everyone here. Mike, you have anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, I think that's good, man. I think that covers it up. And if you missed our last episode where we talked about the benefits of being a part-time reseller, might be interesting to listen to the two together and kind of figure out where you land on that. Did we miss anything? And of course, reselling changes as time goes. So we'll probably have another episode in a few years, kind of reevaluating this, because maybe things have changed, whether it's part-time or full-time.
Yeah, agreed. So with that being said, hope you have an incredible week of sales. And if you're part-time or full-time, hope you're killing it. And with that being said, make sure to be real.
Be relevant.
Be reselling. Peace.